Hello there to my regular listeners and any new listeners we may have joining us for the first time. My name is Brian Frydenborg, International Affairs Development and Public Policy Professional, as well as a freelance writer, journalist, consultant, and historian. And today is February 9th, and we have the 5th episode of my Calling It Like It Is podcast/radio show. And today we're going to be talking about ISIS and Jordan and that whole situation in the Middle East. And I'm excited because I think a lot of interesting things are happening now, and I think some of them are actually quite positive, believe it or not. If you've listened to my other podcasts, I haven't necessarily been coming out and saying, yeah, things are going great and they're looking good, but I like where things are moving on this front, and you'll understand why shortly after we get underway here. So without any further ado, let's start it off. For those of you who may not have been paying attention, some interesting things have happened here in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, which is where I currently live. I live in the capital city of Amman. And Jordan, along with several other Arab states, has been partaking in U.S. coalition-led airstrikes against Islamic State and sometimes Nusra Front, the Al-Qaeda affiliate targets in both Syria and Iraq. Jordan had not been participating in airstrikes in Iraq, just in Syria, which is the real stronghold of ISIS. That's where they came from before they marched into Iraq and took over so much Iraqi territory. But what has happened is that since last year, when things were getting really bad and ISIS was making all kinds of progress, the Obama administration, and I've written about this, you can check my article out on my website or on my LinkedIn page, but the Obama administration came to power in part because they pledged to end American involvement in the Iraq War. And over the course of Obama's first 3 years in office, that is really first 2 years, that is what he did. He came into office in January 2009, and actually, yes, over 3 years, he withdrew all our combat troops, starting in 2010 with the major withdrawal, and ending in 2011. And by the time we left, the security situation was actually greatly improved, starting with the efforts under the surge when Secretary Gates took over and General Petraeus took over. And 2011, 2012 were the best years as far as lack of violence in Iraq since before our invasion. And the very sectarian, very divisive Shiite Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, basically squandered what was a great opportunity to use that security space that had been granted to him by the efforts of U.S. troops and others in Iraq, along with Sunni tribesmen who had joined forces with us to drive out Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia/Iraq, which started calling itself the Islamic State around this time, and they were mostly driven out into Syria and were degraded down to the level of a mere nuisance. But they started reconstituting themselves in the chaos of the Syrian civil war, which also began in 2011, just as U.S. troops were leaving. And then Maliki really, really pissed off the Sunnis to the point that they, instead of fighting with the government, which they had with the U.S. during the surge, they were now openly rebelling against Maliki's government by the end of 2013. Maliki's government had been that oppressive towards Sunnis and had gone back on agreements with the Kurds and cheated them out of some of the oil money they needed. And so Iraq was fragmenting, coming apart, and in comes ISIS. And Sunni militants, certainly in Anbar province, practiced the old maxim, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and made common cause with ISIS. And I think we all know a little bit about what's been happening since then. And Obama had, wanted to stay away from this. He didn't want to deal with it. Maliki kept asking for more help, but if we helped his regime, we'd be basically supporting his oppression of Sunnis and Kurds. So we made it clear if we were going to really get involved that Maliki either had to be more accommodating and inclusive, which he refused to be, or that the Iraqis needed to find someone else to lead them. And we made that very explicit. We made some moves behind the scene. Iraqis' religious and political establishment, as well as Iran, even Iraq's main foreign patrons, having supplanted us over the last few years. They all came together with some pushing and nudging from us, and they got Maliki to step down peacefully. It came very close to a coup or a mini civil war within the Iraqi government, but that thankfully did not happen, and I think this is one of the greatest accomplishments of the Obama administration diplomatic team. You can read more about that and find all kinds of great articles to explain that in detail, linked to in my article on this. But anyway, so the U.S., especially once they saw 40,000 Yazidis, a religious minority sect surrounded by ISIS, who were going to be either massacred or sold into slavery, we started striking. And it was just when, but they were very limited strikes, and it was just when we were getting that tipping point of Maliki being pushed out. And when he finally was peacefully pushed out and Haider al-Abadi took over, who's much more moderate, it seems, and willing to cut deals and do things like appoint a Sunni defense minister and give the Kurds the oil revenue that they're entitled to from previous agreements, which Maliki did not. Progress has been made. He also has refrained from bombing the civilian areas that ISIS controls, so aerial bombardment of just cities, which Maliki was doing, and not making friends with the Sunnis in the process. That's something Abadi stopped also. So, right after Abadi took over last summer in August, the U.S. really stepped up its efforts. We made it clear that we weren't going to be Iraq's Air Force and that the Iraqis needed to really come together, which they have. The Peshmerga, the Kurdish militias, and the Iraqi government have been coordinating, which is good. We'd like to see more coordination with the Sunni militants, but let's at least be optimistic. I'm sorry, with the Sunni tribesmen, but let's be optimistic. And even though that hasn't really happened to a large degree yet, but we've got a whole coalition now. We got the Belgians and the Danes, the French, the British, as well as a number of Arab countries in the region partaking in these airstrikes against ISIS, Islamic State. Daesh is the Arabic acronym. Militants and terrorists, wherever you want to call them, they're awful people. They're committing awful acts, really just almost unspeakable torture. And what happened in Little Jordan, and I have a friend who has a friend who referred to Jordan as the Hashemite kingdom of boredom. And that's not to say anything negative about Jordan. It's actually a positive thing. In a part of the world where there's so much violence and chaos and crazy headlines all the time, Jordan's this kind of oasis of stability where very little bad things happen. Very few bad things, I should say. And so Jordan being involved in this is a big deal. But King Abdullah is a great ally. Frankly, he's a much better ally to us than Benjamin Netanyahu is. Everyone thinks Israel's our closest ally, but I can't remember the last time he actually listened to us on something important, whereas Jordan and King Abdullah seem to respect our advice a lot more. But one of their pilots, and we found out that it seems this pilot, rather than from mechanical failures, it wasn't ISIS shooting this F-16 down. American-supplied F-16s form the core of Jordan's fighter jet aspect of its Air Force. But a United Arab Emirates pilot, another member of another Arab member of the coalition that's taking on ISIS, seems to have shot down by accident this Jordanian pilot in his F-16. He was then captured by ISIS. And this is a big deal in Jordan because they haven't had like a combat casualty from a war in decades. They tend to stay out of this kind of stuff. They sat out of the Gulf War because they were close with Iraq. Um, but and that was King Abdullah's father, King Hussein, who made that call. But yeah, this poor pilot, this young man, captured by ISIS, really captured the public's mind here in Jordan. And what happened was there were some militants, including one female attempted suicide bomber, who was in prison in Jordan, and ISIS had also taken some Japanese reporters hostage. So Jordan's government was trying to negotiate with ISIS for release of at least one of those Japanese reporters, as well as their pilot. But it turns out that the pilot, the whole time they were negotiating, had actually already been killed. We are told he was killed January 3rd. But the video just came out a week ago. Not even a week ago, I think. Maybe 6 days, 5 days. I've lost track at this point, but very recently. And what ISIS did to this Jordanian pilot was they burned him alive in a cage. Now, we've seen beheadings and crucifixions, but that's a step up, even for this barbaric group named ISIS. And I don't throw loaded terms like barbaric out terribly often. I think they're overused, but certainly not in the case of these ISIS types. So a remarkable thing happened in Jordan, which is fairly politically apathetic. Like every other Arab country, they'll protest stuff that's going on with Israel. There were some protests about the Muhammad cartoons, but I was talking about this with people, about how silly, honestly, the Muslim world, the Arab world looked with all of this craziness going on with ISIS. Thousands and thousands of other Arabs and Muslims being murdered by ISIS. And what were they choosing to focus on? Cartoons published in a French satirical magazine. In France, people were getting riled up about cartoons. They weren't respectful cartoons. They were disrespectful and insensitive. I get it. But still, of all the things going on in the Muslim Arab world today, the number one concern, even just over a week ago, were freaking cartoons. Okay? But something good has come out of this awful situation with this poor Jordanian pilot. It was one single pilot. Okay? To me, I respect the fact that Jordan is a small country that did not involve in wars very often, that this is a big deal and something different. So even though it seems a little bit ridiculous to me that people are getting that upset about one single pilot, I respect the sentiment. I respect the fact that they're not like the U.S. where they're fighting wars all the time and other countries. And even, there's just not even a lot of violent crime in Jordan. It's just a very quiet country. And so this happens, and the public is horrified, and people get very upset. There's all these protests against ISIS, and it's great. Just before a housewarming party I was having, I was downtown near the main mosque there, and all these people were gathering. If you know anything about Jordanian society, it's mainly two groups of people. There are East Bankers, meaning Arabs from the East Bank of the Jordan River, which is where the British divided Mandate Palestine into Transjordan, later Jordan, and Palestine, which later became Israel, West Bank, and Gaza. The West Bank, which I'm sure many of you heard, is a Palestinian territory Israel illegally is occupying since 1967. But the West Bank also refers to everything to the west of the Jordan River, which would include Israel and Gaza, though it's not really, West Bank isn't really used to describe that. But West Bankers are Arabs who came from that side of the Jordan River. They're known as Palestinians. And then East Bankers are the Arabs who were local and native to what is now Jordan. And in all these wars with Israel, what you've had is hundreds of thousands, and now with their descendants, millions, of West Bank Arab Palestinians become a huge part of the population of Jordan. So you basically have East Bankers who you can tell if they're wearing a keffiyeh. It's a red checkered keffiyeh. That means they're Jordanian native descent. And if they're wearing the black checkered keffiyeh, like Yasser Arafat famously wore everywhere, that means they're the Palestinian descent. And there's some tension between these groups. It's not, there was a civil war in 1970. That was a long time ago. Things are much better now. It's not like they hate each other and they get along fairly well. But there's some issues. There are some issues between them. You could see red keffiyehs, black keffiyehs, all kinds of Jordanian flags. Everybody was holding up posters of this pilot who was killed. They were on all these storefronts and taxi cabs all over the place. I mean, it was just really, for me, a really wonderful, positive thing to see is finally an Arab country really focusing on Daesh as the enemy. Not Israel, not Prophet Muhammad cartoons, something very, not that Israel doesn't deserve a lot of criticism for what they're doing, and not that those cartoons weren't sensitive, but really, here and now, things with Israel are not, they're kind of quiet. There's not a lot going on with that right now. There's so much more happening with Daesh. Everyone got so upset with the invasion in Gaza last summer in August. I was upset too. I was one of those people. 2,100 something people were killed in Israel's offensive, in Gaza, most of those civilians. It was awful. That is almost nothing compared to the amount of people that ISIS has killed in Iraq and Syria, or to the amount of people that are dying in Syria's civil war, which in 3 years has surpassed 210,000 now. Okay? And people are upset about Benjamin Netanyahu's invasion that killed about 2,000 people, which they should be. But for me, the scale of the protests didn't match the scale of the atrocities happening. And I was very frustrated and disappointed in the Arab world at this. Frustrated here that people were so upset about that, but they wouldn't be protesting ISIS, which is killing so many more people, or the Syrian civil war more. And now they are. Not so much the Syrian civil war, but certainly ISIS. And the country was debating. There was a sizable minority, at least, possibly more, I don't think so, but a sizable minority that were questioning whether or not Jordan should be participating in these airstrikes and being cooperative with the U.S. in this, and, was it their fight? Well, come on, guys, wake up. It's right on your border. And it shouldn't have taken one of your own pilots being killed in that horrible way for you to realize this. But I welcome this development, because you had this amazing outpouring of support for the Jordanian pilot's family and for the king and for action against ISIS. And the king was not messing around. He was visiting the U.S., and in the middle of his trip, when he found out about what happened to his pilot, he came back. He canceled his trip in the U.S., and he said, basically, to paraphrase, there's going to be hell to pay. We will hunt you down and smoke you out. Sorry, I couldn't resist the George Bush quote there. But really, he said, we are not going to hold back. And as I have sat in my new apartment the last few days, I have seen, starting on the first day of the airstrikes that Jordan carried out in both Iraq and Syria. This is new. They hadn't struck targets in Iraq before. Now they are. They carried out 56 airstrikes in 3 days. That's actually a lot. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the scale of U.S. involvement, but it's a few airstrikes here, a few airstrikes there. It has not been round-the-clock airstrikes, and there's a reason for that. We'll get to that in a second. But that's great, and that was in the first 3 days. Day 4, I heard the jets coming back from another bombing run. Okay, I live in Amman. There's a big air base nearby, and these jets often pass by. And right after they did the first airstrikes to let ISIS know this was not going to stand, the murder of their pilot like that, them negotiating with Jordan while they had already, for the pilot's release when they had already murdered the pilot, they flew several squadrons of F-16s around the capital, some very close to my apartment. I could see the pilot. The jets were really close. I'm on the 4th story of this building. And it was remarkable. Jordan has come together, and Abdullah, King Abdullah, bless him, is taking the lead here. And that's a sentence I have been waiting to say. Insert Arab monarch here, ruler, elected leader, whatever, has taken the lead in this fight against ISIS. Okay, and this goes back to the U.S. involvement. Now, Obama made it clear before, I think he was totally right in this approach. He's getting a lot of criticism from the right and also the far left for what's going on here. The far right is saying, oh, we need to have boots on the ground and be doing all this stuff. That may be true, but I really am not certain about the boots on the ground. And what I really do know is that this is not America's problem primarily. These are Arabs and Muslims, and not just Arab Muslims, Arab Christians, Arab Yazidis, others dying in this awful conflict going on, mainly in Syria and Iraq, but also spilling over into Lebanon now with intermittent violence happening there, increasing slowly. And, you know, I was just talking with actually my roommate about this. It doesn't do the Arab world any good in the long run for them to keep buying these weapons and planes and ammunition from us. But then when stuff really gets bad, they just wait and wait for things to get really, really bad so that the U.S. will come in to the rescue. That's what Maliki was hoping. Maliki in Iraq wasn't doing anything to accommodate the very people he was fighting and rebelling. And these are his countrymen. Okay? You can't govern Iraq if most of the Sunnis are revolting against you. And his idea was just to crush the revolt, not to address any of their very legitimate concerns. And he just thought we'd be stupid enough to come in and just bail him out when things were getting really, really, really bad, which they were. And the rebels were even coming close to Baghdad and threatening Erbil, the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan, the Kurdish area in the north of Iraq. And Obama made it clear, look, we aren't doing this for you. This is your fight. We will be your ally and we'll be there to help you. But we can't be supporting you if you're oppressing your own people and we're seen as joining in the oppression. That's not going to happen. And now it's not as much about oppression, but it's simply ISIS here is in Syria and Iraq. They're trying to get into Lebanon. They're kind of made some infiltration there. They'd like to get to places like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Palestine. They haven't had any luck there so far, really. They have made some inroads into Sinai, which is worrisome, but Sinai is always kind of crazy. If you know anything about the Middle East, it's just kind of, Sinai is just being Sinai. They're always got some crazy stuff going on there. It's mostly just desert. But yeah, so the idea was that we were going to be providing support this whole time, but light to moderate support, and we were going to use the fact that that support was only light to moderate to really push regional powers, not just the Arabs, also the Turks. Iran's actually been doing, quite a bit here, somewhat to its credit. I'm not crazy about their support of Assad's regime, but it's a good thing someone's involved with fighting ISIS enthusiastically. Hezbollah as well. They've been very active, which really makes me question why Israel committed that strike before, and there was that little tit for tat, but maybe who knows, maybe Hezbollah was planning to commit some sort of attack against Israel. I don't think that's a move they would have made at this point, considering their backs are up against the wall, fighting for Assad's regime against all these crazy rebels, the extremist rebels anyway, and other non-extremist rebels. But anyway, so here we have Jordan stepping it up. They have taken the lead. Right now, they're the leaders in what's going on as far as airstrikes. And that's great. That's exactly what needs to happen. Sorry, America is several continents and an ocean away. ISIS is not going to be building a caliphate in Missouri or Michigan anytime soon. Okay? They're not going to be coming to the U.S. and whatever. Maybe some crazy people will try a few attacks here and there, but we are not really threatened right now. That could change in the future. But right now, I'm sorry, my friends in the Middle East, this is your world, your loved ones, your cities, your towns, your countries that are threatened more than anybody else. Okay? Nobody thought they could be able to take over so much of Syria and Iraq. Well, they have. Other countries could be next. It's time for you to stop playing chess with Syria's country. Stop using the Syrian landscape as a political chessboard for your secular versus religious and Shia versus Sunni conflicts. It's time to come together, wipe out ISIS. You guys take the lead and shoulder the burden on that, and end the Syrian civil war. Okay? You could end arms going into Syria. You guys could come up with your own no-fly zone. The Arab League could keep Russian military shipments from coming into Assad. And could, it wouldn't be easy, but it's very possible for the powers to come here and get rid of the really extreme rebels and then come together with some agreement with everyone else that's left standing. And, give Assad immunity, but get him out. But no, instead, we've got everyone playing with proxy wars and militias and this and that and terrorists, and it's awful. And people want to act, some people want to act as if the U.S. created this situation, which is absolute nonsense. We haven't even committed $1 billion in aid over 3 years. Okay, we just authorized about $500 million in aid. Before that, there were about a few $100 million in aid. Very tepid, very little support and response for moderate rebels. And yeah, some mistakes have been made, obviously, and some of the people we armed probably shouldn't have been armed. But there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that a large amount of our funding our funding or training or weapons have gone to ISIS or people like them. There is, again, no evidence that a large amount of our support has gone to those types of people. Far more aid is coming from Russia into Assad and from private citizens in the Gulf to some of these more extremist groups. So the U.S., compared to most of the regional players, is actually playing a very small role in terms of who it's arming and who it's funding in Syria. So don't let anybody tell you that the U.S. created ISIS or created this situation in Syria. We bear a lot more responsibility for what happened in Iraq, but that's a whole different thing. But Syria, we have just not been very involved. Okay? And even our airstrikes now, starting last fall, have been quite limited. Okay? But here we have Jordan, 56 strikes in 3 days, and more strikes today. I heard the jets coming back from their bombing runs just a few hours ago. So that's 4 straight days of strikes from the Jordanian Air Force. And that's great. I honestly think that is a really great development. I'm very proud of King Abdullah. I think he's probably the best, if not one of the best, if not the best leader in the Arab world right now. And this is his moment. Whenever I get into a taxi here and I talk to people, everyone says, "Oh, Abdullah great," but King Hussein better. King Hussein better. Abdullah okay. Abdullah good, but King Hussein great. His father. King Hussein was very popular, very beloved, very respected throughout the Arab world. And Abdullah just hasn't had anything big happen on his watch. He hasn't been really tested in a crisis-type situation. And this is his crisis, and this is his test, and so far he's doing an amazing job. He's rallied public support. Flying the jets throughout the capital, the skies of the capital, right after the first bombing runs, and also in the pilot's hometown. I think it was Carrick. That galvanized a lot of people. A lot of people came out after Friday prayers, and they showed their solidarity. They showed their support of the king. They showed their anger at ISIS. They showed their compassion and support for the pilot's family, and their sadness at his death, and their willingness to support going after ISIS. And Jordan's, a spokesman from the Jordanian government claimed, it's hard to verify this, that they've degraded ISIS's military capabilities by 20%. I'm not willing to dismiss that outright. 56 strikes in 3 days, and who knows how many today, plus other strikes from other coalition members. And this is funny, okay? This is Arab leadership making a difference in Arab conflicts, okay? The UAE, who accidentally probably shot down, we just found out recently, the pilot's plane. And his name was Muath al-Kasaba. And the military operation by Jordan has been nicknamed Operation Martyr Muath, in honor of the pilot. Okay. The UAE pilot may have, it seems, shot down Kassabez's plane. And it wasn't their pilot who was shot down, but the UAE, after this pilot was captured, said, oh, we don't want to risk our pilots' lives. We're pulling out of the bombing. We're not part of the coalition anymore. We're not going to send our pilots. So they basically wussed out. Jordan, who actually suffered the lost pilot and then the casualty, they stepped it up. They didn't take it lying down. They said, we're not going to stand for this, and we're coming after you, ISIS, and you'll know who we are. And the UAE was like, wow, we look pretty bad. They just announced they're joining the coalition again. That's Arab leadership on the part of Abdullah, King Abdullah, and this is great. This is exactly what needs to happen. This is Obama's entire strategy, which he's been saying for a long time now, that the Arabs have to step it up, the Turks have to step it up, the region needs to step it up. We're not going to do this for you. We're not going to be the leaders here. This is your problem, first and foremost. We'll be there as your ally to help you, but you can't expect us to shoulder the cost, the burden, the risk, the responsibility here. You've got to do it. Well, now we have an Arab country that's really stepping it up. Not just a few strikes here and there like the other countries, but they've really taken it to ISIS. I'm hearing these jets daily now fly by, and it's what has needed to happen for a long time, because ultimately, the post-colonial era, the independence era, in the Middle East has been characterized by extreme dependence on the West for this, that, and the other thing, and these countries not willing to act on their own and fix their own problems. And instead of making tough political compromises to keep their own people happy, they just expect foreign aid to bail them out, like the Shah with the U.S. and how stupid we were with that, okay? But honestly, ISIS is the thing, the U.S., Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, this whole region can unite against ISIS. And we can unite for peace for Syria, to end this conflict. Okay? I don't expect Russia to really do anything because of the way Putin acts. But I believe that we could come to terms with Turkey, Iran, all these other countries in the region for a peace settlement that gets rid of Assad, gives him immunity, but gets him out, and where we degrade the really extremist militants and terrorists and atrocity beheading types in Syria, where we help Iraq. I mean, Iraq actually, and within a few weeks, they're saying they are going to launch an operation to retake Mosul, the largely Christian city that was, or at least a city with a huge Christian minority, where so many of them fled here to Jordan. They've been sleeping on church pews. I mean, things were just awful. But yeah, one of Iraq's largest cities fell to ISIS, and so the Kurdish Peshmerga, the Kurdish army, basically, the official Iraqi army, other groups in Iraq are working towards retaking this major city they lost to ISIS. If they push ISIS out of Mosul, if the capital, so-called capital of their caliph for ISIS, really takes a lot of hits, which has happened in recent days as Jordan's really hit Raqqa, this city that is the sort of caliphate capital, the so-called caliphate capital. This is all very good, and we saw very reluctantly with Turkey, they were helping the Kurds a bit, and especially U.S. airstrikes, more or less pushed ISIS out of Kobani. The bottom line is, all these Republican conservatives who are saying, oh, Obama needs to do more, boots on the ground, it's failing, it's failing, it's failing. I'm sorry, ISIS is being pushed back on multiple fronts right now. We've got an Arab country taking the lead on taking the fight to ISIS. We have an Arab country inspiring one that had backed out to rejoin the fight. Saudi Arabia pledged a bunch of money to Jordan to help them fight. Okay, the British military sending advisors in to help Jordan coordinate here. I mean, Jordan's stepping it up, and this is exactly what Obama's plan was to have happen. And we say, welcome to the party. We're glad that you're really taking a important role in the fight here, really realizing that you have the biggest stake in this. And if Abdullah can lead the Arab world into doing what they need to be doing, then more power to him. We're proud of him, and he's a great ally. And, Jordan, listen, don't freak out. Don't be afraid. I've had some of my Jordanian friends, even one or two of my expat friends, say, "Oh, are we safe? Is Daesh going to come here?" That's the Arabic acronym for ISIS. Or, and people back home are like, "Brian, be safe." Let me explain something about Jordan to you guys, okay? From 2000 to 2000, you had the Second Intifada, the major conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, raging in Gaza and the West Bank. That was right on Jordan's border, okay? You had the Iraq War, which started in 2003 with the U.S. invasion, and now the fighting there still continues on Iraq's border with Jordan for the last, 12 years. And that was going on for some of the same time as the Intifada in the West Bank and the other Palestinian areas. And you've had the Syrian civil war for the last 4 years now, almost. From 2011 on another border at the same time as Iraq. And this whole time, in 15 years of conflict on Jordan's borders, sometimes 2 conflicts going on at once. How many attacks have been carried out in Jordan? 2. 1 or 2 suicide bombers in 2005. I believe it was 2, and that was it. And they totally increased the security at the hotels. There's been nothing since then. In 15 years, let's repeat this, to my Jordanian friends, to my American friends back home, to the world, Jordan is fine. Jordan does not need to be afraid. Jordan is strong. They have a good military. They're well-trained. They're well-equipped. They have strong allies like the U.S., the U.K., Israel. They're getting a lot of help from their friends and neighbors. But they've done a good job on their own. They've limited the spillover from 3 different conflicts on their border in 15 years to 2 attacks in the year 2005, and that's it. So it's been 10 years since anyone successfully carried out some sort of attack like that in Jordan. And ISIS would love to get in here, but I don't like their chances. Honestly, guys, the worst case scenario, there might be a couple of attacks. A couple of guys open fire with some kind of gun, maybe a suicide bomber or 2. It's not going to affect that many people. It's not going to kill that many people, and maybe none of them will be successful. Okay, we know ISIS is trying, but good luck, because they're going to need it. And I don't really mean good luck. I mean they can go to hell, if I believed in hell. I mean, too bad there's not hell for ISIS to go to, because the things they're doing are just atrocious. So anyway, that's my podcast. I just want to say that, I'm very pleased with what Jordan has done, that they're taking responsibility for their own neighborhood, for a fight that really needs to be the main fight of the Arab Muslim world today, is confronting extremism. That's exactly what the king has been saying. He's completely right. Stop focusing on cartoons that are printed in France. You know what? You guys got bigger fish to fry. You got bigger problems to confront, and ISIS right now has got to be number 1 in groups like them. It's not just ISIS. It's Boko Haram. It's Al-Shabaab. It's others. Okay? So we're glad that what needs to be done is being done. Kudos to Abdullah. Kudos to Jordan. You guys are doing an awesome job. And, as an American, I'm going to say we're right here with you. We're here to be your friend. We're here to support you. And thanks for